Belonging was never a gift in Ironhold. It was a ledger, a narrow accounting of blood, obedience, and usefulness, and anyone who could not pay was quietly rewritten as a burden. Valentina had learned that rule as a child, then again as a wife, then again when her husband died and left her with his name, but not his protection. By the winter she carried new life beneath her heart. She understood the final cruelty of pack law. Innocence mattered less than fear, and fear could be pointed like a spear by the right hands. That evening, those hands wore her cousin's face. The council hall reeked of wet wool, smoke, and old pine resin. Meltwater dripped from cloaks onto stone, each plink loud in the silence that followed her name. Valentina stood in the center ring with moon iron around her wrists, chains short enough to force her shoulders back, long enough to make every tremor visible. Her belly strained the seams of her worn dress. 6 months. Too far along to hide, too weak to keep pretending the long winter had not carved hollow places beneath her cheekbones. Theron Ashford stood at the edge of torchlight, his left forearm wrapped in blood-stained linen that had been white an hour earlier. He held the cloth up like a banner. "She attacked me when I confronted her," he said, voice pitched for sympathy. "She said Vale Silver buys better loyalty than Ironhold scraps." A low murmur spread through the benches. Valentina stared at his bandage, at the neat lines of torn flesh she had glimpsed when the guards dragged her from her room. Not claw marks from a struggle, parallel cuts, deliberate and shallow enough to heal clean. Self-made. She had opened her mouth then, and 2 matrons in the corridor had lowered their eyes as if shame were contagious. Now she lifted her chin. "Unbind me and let the healers scent the wound. They'll tell you what made it." No one moved. Elder Garrick tapped a carved staff against stone. "You will speak when called, Valentina Ironhold." Her mother flinched in the second row but did not look at her. Her younger brother stared at the floor, knuckles white around the bench edge. Her aunt, Theron's mother, wept noiselessly into a sleeve already damp with tears, a careful performance of grief for a son wronged by kin. Theron stepped closer, sorrow sharpening into outrage. "Should I also show the letters in her hand? The patrol routes, gate rotations, grain counts, all promised to Vale scouts in exchange for coin." A guard dropped a leather pouch before the council. Silver seals stamped with Ironhold's crest spilled out, along with folded pages bearing Valentina's name. She knew her own script, knew the way her loops leaned right when she hurried, knew these were copies of her hand, not her hand itself, each stroke too perfect, each line too even. If I beg now, they will call it guilt. If I rage, they will call it proof. If I collapse, they will say weakness is confession. She swallowed against bile and made her voice steady. "Those seals were not in my room yesterday. Someone planted them." Theron gave a sad smile that never reached his eyes. Always someone else. Elder Mira leaned forward, age spots dark against her fingers. "You were seen with a Vale scout near the southern ridge." "I treated an injured wolf at the border creek," Valentina shot back. "In daylight, with 3 hunters present." One of those hunters, Dane, sat near the door. He looked at Theron, then at the council, then away from her. "I saw her pass a bundle," he muttered. The lie landed clean. Dane had taken that bundle himself. Dried yarrow, willow bark, and cloth. Supplies for anyone bleeding in winter, enemy or not. She had handed them over because fever did not care about banners, because pain sounded the same in every throat. Now, mercy was treason. By the time the torches burned down a finger's width, the verdict had already hardened in every face that mattered. Retaliation from the Vale remnants had been threatened for weeks after a skirmish at the pass. Ironhold's stores were thin, patrols thinner. They needed a concession that looked like strength and functioned like surrender. Elder Garrick rose with effort. To preserve the valley and avert blood feud, the council accepts transfer terms. Valentina Ironhold will be delivered to Valewood territory at dusk as indemnity and witness of good faith. Her claims are unproven. Her risk is not. The room did not erupt. That was worse. Relief moved through the benches like warm wind through dry grass, silent and grateful. They were saved, and the price had a name. Her mother finally spoke, voice cracked thin. Please, she is carrying. Elder Mira did not soften. Then let the child be raised where its mother's choices lead. Valentina's laugh came out broken. My choices? Theron stepped in before anyone could answer. He crouched so only she could hear him over the rustle of cloaks. You should have stayed small, he whispered. Now listen carefully. Your child will never carry Ironhold blood, not in name, not in claim, not in memory. The words struck harder than the chains. Not exile then, erasure. She jerked back, and the moon iron bit her skin, cold fire along her wrists. Guards hauled her upright when her knees folded. The crowd parted as she was marched through the center aisle, every face turned toward her like she was already a lesson for someone else. Outside, the air knifed through her lungs. Snow had hardened into gray crust along the courtyard walls, and dusk stained the mountains bruised violet. They shoved her into a supply wagon with no blanket, only a coil of rope and a broken grain sack that smelled of mold. 4 wolves rode with her, 2 ahead and 2 behind, spears upright as if escorting a criminal mattered more than the woman who had stitched half their children's winter fevers with numb hands and candlelight. By the second hour after sunset, the wheels left the main road and ground over frozen ruts toward the border gullies. Pain tightened low in her back, in waves that made her bite her lip until she tasted iron. She pressed both shackled hands under her belly and breathed through each cramp, counting heartbeats. 1, 2, 3, hold. 1, 2, 3, release. Do not break here. Not in their cart. Not for him. The wagon stopped where Ironhold pines thinned into black stumps left by old fire. Beyond lay Valewood's ruined approach, jagged stone teeth under moonlight. One guard jumped down and yanked her toward the edge marker, a monolith carved with split sigils where pack claims met and bled. This is far enough, he said. You're leaving her bound, another muttered. Orders. Valentina turned, searching the faces she had known since childhood. Torin, whose daughter she had delivered in spring. Hal, whose mate she had kept alive through a lung sickness with nothing but steam and herbs. Neither met her eyes. Torin cleared his throat. Walk straight east. There's old walls half a mile in. Hal spat into snow. If Vale asks, tell them we complied. Valentina lifted her chained wrists. And if I fall? No one answered. They cut the rope at her elbows, shoved her once between the shoulder blades, and stepped back over the borderline as if touching foreign ground might curse them. Then they were gone, hoofbeats fading into trees, leaving only wind and the thin, metallic rattle each time she moved her hands. For a long moment she stood still in the dark, shaking so hard her teeth clicked. The valley opened before her in broken ridges and frost-bitten grass. The old Valewood keep a silhouette of collapsed towers and one surviving gatehouse. Enemy land, enemy law, enemy alpha. She had been taught those words before she could read. Behind her lay a pack that had traded her to save itself and called it duty. A cramp seized her hard enough to blur the world. She doubled over, breath scraping, then forced herself upright. She could curl up here and freeze before moonset. She could wait for scavengers, mercenaries, or patrol wolves to decide her worth in the dark. Or she could move. I am still here. I am still breathing. He does not get my child. Not my name. Not this. She started walking. Snow crust cracked beneath thin boots soaked through within minutes. Wind carried scents she did not know. Cedar smoke, wet stone, unfamiliar wolves layered over old ash. The chain between her wrists clinked against the carved bangles she still wore from her wedding, a tiny, relentless sound that measured distance better than hope. Twice she stumbled and caught herself on dead brush. The third time she went to one knee, palms in ice, and stayed there until the pain in her lower back ebbed enough to stand again. Clouds shifted. Moonlight flooded the valley, silvering the shattered gate ahead. She could make out carvings on its lintel, worn almost smooth by fire and weather, and beyond it the dark skeleton of a courtyard. Another step, then another. By the time she reached the broken arch, her vision narrowed to a tunnel edged in black. She put one hand on cold stone to steady herself, felt ancient runes under her fingers, and heard movement from within the keep. Boots on gravel, several sets, quick and purposeful. Valentina tried to lift her head, to shape one clear sentence that might buy mercy or at least caution, but the world tilted. Her knees gave way. She pitched forward into the threshold of enemy ground, chains striking stone, and darkness rose to meet her before she hit the floor. Darkness did not take her cleanly. It came in waves, a black tide rising to her throat and falling back just enough for pain to return. Stone rushed up, but impact never landed. A hard body caught her at the waist and shoulders with a force that knocked a rough breath from her chest. Leather creaked near her ear. A cloak smelling of cedar smoke and winter rain wrapped around her, and a man's voice cut through the clamor with controlled authority. Easy. Do not move her wrists. Boots scraped on gravel all around them. She heard at least 6 wolves, maybe more from the way scent layered over scent in the ruined archway. Male, armed, alert. Not scavengers, not mercenaries. Patrol sentinels. A torch hissed as snowmelt struck the pitch-soaked cloth, throwing amber light across fractured stone and half-collapsed walls still blackened from old fire. She crossed from Ironhold, someone said, bound in moon iron. Could be bait, another answered, low and tense. Theron's people have used worse. Valentina forced one eye open. The world swam, then sharpened in jagged pieces. A ring of dark-cloaked wolves stood in defensive formation, spears angled outward toward the pass, not inward toward her. Their insignia was stitched in silver thread at shoulder and throat, an old tree split by a crescent moon, Valewood's mark, faded but unmistakable. Behind them, the keep rose in broken tiers against the sky, one tower intact and lit from within like a watchful eye. Her chains rattled when she tried to push up. The man holding her tightened his grip, not hurting, simply preventing her from folding onto the stone again. "Stay with me," he said. The tone startled her more than the words. No contempt, no triumphant curiosity, just command wrapped around concern so practical it felt unreal. She turned her face toward him and saw only the lower half at first, a strong jaw darkened with stubble, a thin white scar crossing his mouth's left corner, breath fogging in the cold. His cloak was black wolf fur over worn leather armor reinforced at shoulder and forearm. Not ceremonial, functional. A leader who expected to fight in what he wore. A sentinel stepped closer and lowered his spear. "Alpha, we should secure her in the holding barracks until we confirm identity and intent." Alpha. The title should have sent pure fear through her. It did, but fear was no longer simple. It had too many edges now. The man did not look up from her. Identity first. He shifted so moonlight struck his face, and Valentina saw him clearly. Power sat on him like weather, not because of his height, though he was broad-shouldered and built like a wall of muscle held in check. Not because each sentinel watched him with the fixed attention wolves gave only to dominant command, but because even crouched in the debris of a burned gate, he carried the absolute certainty of someone who had survived ruin and claimed authority from its bones. His hair was dark at the roots, with pale strands at the temples that caught silver under the moon. His mouth was stern. His eyes were amber, startlingly bright in the dimness, and focused on her with an intensity that felt like recognition and warning at once. She recoiled on instinct. Her back hit his arm instead of stone. Her belly tightened hard, then eased. "Do not," she whispered, voice scraped raw. "If this is for spectacle, just finish it." A muscle jumped in his cheek. No spectacle. He lifted her bound wrists carefully, inspecting the iron cuffs. The metal had rubbed skin raw to red crescents. His expression changed then, not to pity, to anger leashed tight. "Who did this?" She almost laughed, the sound brittle and wrong. "My pack." A brief silence rippled through the sentinels. One cursed softly under his breath. Another straightened, grip hardening on his spear shaft as if the answer itself was an insult. The Alpha drew a knife from his belt, held it up where she could see, and waited. "I can cut the chain link between cuffs. The bracelets may need a smith." "May I?" "Permission," he was asking. Suspicion burned through her weakness. "Why?" His gaze did not leave hers. "Because you are in pain." She nodded once, too tired to craft a better defense. The blade bit metal with a harsh ring. Sparks spat. On the second strike, the center link snapped, and her arms fell apart with sudden weightless relief so sharp she gasped. Needles of sensation raced from wrist to elbow. The Alpha sheathed the knife and slid one hand behind her shoulders again, keeping her upright as tremors shook through her frame. "Healer's Tower," he called without raising his voice. "Now." Two sentinels moved immediately. A third hesitated. "Alpha Sebastian, if Ironhold sent her to poison talks." "She was thrown across the border in restraints," Sebastian said, still calm, still dangerous. "Do you see an assassin?" The sentinel lowered his head. "No, Alpha." By the second week of winter's dark, Valentina had learned that exhaustion stripped pride faster than hunger ever could. She let them lift her because her legs would not obey, and because the child inside her rolled once, then went still in a way that made panic rise cold through her chest. She pressed a hand to her belly as they carried her through the shattered courtyard. Wind funneled between cracked walls, carrying old ash and wet moss. Lanterns burned along rebuilt walkways of fresh-cut timber bolted onto ancient stone, evidence of a pack stitching itself back together after catastrophe. I am in enemy hands. I am carried by wolves taught to hate my name. I should fight, bite, run, do anything but this. But the child is quiet and my body is failing, and this man asked before he touched me. Hold that. Hold one true thing and keep breathing. The thought came in present tense, bright and urgent, as if spoken from the center of her own ribs. I do not trust him. I do not trust any of this. Yet his pulse at my shoulder is steady, not racing with cruelty or triumph. If he wanted me humiliated, he would have left me at the gate for his wolves to inspect like cargo. He did not. He cut the chain. He called for a healer. Keep your eyes open. Keep your mind sharp. Survive this room, then the next. Survive until morning. Survive until the child kicks again. They entered the surviving tower through a heavy oak door reinforced with iron bands. Heat from a central brazier washed over her face, carrying rosemary, boiled grain, and the clean bitterness of medicinal tinctures. Shelves lined the curved walls stacked with jars of dried roots, salves, and folded linen. A gray-haired healer in a dark tunic looked up from a mortar, startled, then set pestle aside and strode toward them. "Table," she ordered. "Blankets. Hot water." Sebastian laid Valentina down with careful precision, one forearm still braced behind her neck until the healer nodded support was set. Only then did he step back. The loss of his warmth made the room feel suddenly larger, colder. The healer began checking pulse, pupils, breathing, then paused at Valentina's abdomen and glanced at Sebastian. "She is far along." I can count months, Mara. Can you count complications? Mara snapped, already mixing herbs into steaming water. Out. Sebastian did not move. No. Mara looked ready to argue further, then seemed to read something in his face and chose triage over debate. She pressed a cup to Valentina's mouth. Sip. Slowly. The liquid tasted of mint and willow bark, bitter enough to make her eyes water, but warmth spread down her throat. She swallowed twice, then coughed. Sebastian was there again, one hand steadying the cup while Mara adjusted the blanket around Valentina's legs. When his fingers brushed her wrist, the world narrowed to that single point. Heat surged beneath her skin so fast it felt like fire running along old cracks in ice. At the same instant, cold traveled her spine to the base of her skull, crisp and bright, and a ringing pulse flared behind her heart with each beat. Not pain, not fever. Recognition so profound it tore a startled sound from her throat. Sebastian froze. His inhale was sharp, almost a gasp. Amber in his irises deepened, then bled toward molten gold at the edges as his pupils thinned. Claws pushed from his fingertips with an audible click against the cup's rim, then retracted by force of will. Every sentinel in the doorway stiffened as a pressure wave rolled outward from him, invisible but unmistakable, a dominance aura snapping through the room like a thunder crack without sound. One by one, they dropped to a knee. Mara whispered an oath under her breath and backed a step away from the table. Valentina stared at Sebastian while instinct and terror collided in her bloodstream. She had expected revulsion when he realized she was pregnant. She had braced for the blank indifference of a powerful male calculating political cost. Instead, every line of him went taut with awe and disbelief and a hunger that was not possession, but claim, recognized too late. Her awareness sharpened along her spine, every scent suddenly distinct, every heartbeat in the room loud. The animal part of her went rigid, not in threat, in answer. No, not this, not here, not with him. Yet when he moved closer, she leaned toward him before she could stop herself. Sebastian knelt beside the table, eyes locked on hers as if afraid to blink and lose her. His voice came low, roughened by restraint. Valentina Ironhold. She flinched. I never told you. I know. He swallowed, throat working. Gold still burned at the center of his gaze. I have known your name for months. Confusion cut through the bond shock. How? He glanced once at the kneeling wolves, then back to her. Border ledgers, trader manifests, healer tallies copied from checkpoint logs. Every record that crossed the pass with your handwriting on it. I started searching after the dreams began. What dreams? You at this gate, he said. In snow, in rain, in blood. Every time I reached you too late. The room had gone utterly silent except for the brazier crackling and her own ragged breathing. Mara watched from the shelf, expression altered from irritation to wary reverence. Valentina's mouth trembled with exhaustion and anger and a fragile, unwanted hope. You are telling me the enemy Alpha hunted my name because of dreams. I am telling you, Sebastian said, each word deliberate, that my wolf has known you longer than my mind allowed. Her heart pounded against the healer's blanket. Fear remained, a hard knot under her ribs. Shame remained. The memory of being bartered like livestock still burned. But the pull between them was undeniable, a live thread drawing taut across all the lies that had delivered her here. She should turn away. She could not. Their gazes held unbroken while moonlight poured through the tower slit and painted both of them in silver. Outside, wind struck the keep walls and moved on. Inside, an entire hierarchy waited on the next breath between them. Mara broke first. Out! She snapped at the kneeling sentinels, voice sharpened by urgency rather than fear. All of you, if you intend to worship your Alpha, do it somewhere that does not block my herbs. The wolves rose and withdrew without argument, boots thudding down the curved stair. Only Sebastian remained beside the table, still watching Valentina as if he had found the one thing he had spent years misnaming and could not trust his own sight. Mara shoved a basin into his hands. "If you are staying, be useful. Cool cloth. Her fever is climbing." He moved at once. No hesitation, no offended pride. He dipped linen, wrung it, and paused with the cloth hovering above Valentina's brow. "May I?" he asked. That single question unsettled her more than the bond's violent recognition. Men with power did not ask. They took, then called it necessity. She gave a brittle nod, and he laid the cloth against her skin with careful, measured pressure. The fever rose anyway. By the time full dark settled over the keep, pain had spread through her lower back and hips in relentless waves that stole language and left only breath. Mara checked the child's position twice, muttered that the strain was dangerous but not yet catastrophic, and brewed bitter infusions that helped for minutes before nausea tore through the relief. Valentina turned her head and vomited into the basin Sebastian held without flinching. Shame burned hotter than fever. "I am sorry," she whispered hoarsely. "For what?" he said, rinsing the basin with water he had warmed himself. "Being ill?" She closed her eyes. She expected pity or discomfort. Some subtle recoil. None came. He steadied the cup when she could not keep her hand from shaking, waited through each swallow and said nothing about weakness, nothing about burden, nothing at all except practical instructions in that low, even voice that seemed built for storms. Small sips. Pause. Again. When cramps struck, he asked before touching her shoulder, before shifting the blankets, before lifting her wrists to clean the raw crescents left by moon iron. Every request came quiet and direct, as if consent were as basic to him as breathing. Mara eventually left to grind fresh willow bark, muttering that she would return before a moonset. The tower chamber narrowed to firelight, herb smoke, and the sound of rain starting against stone. Valentina drifted at the edge of sleep and panic, then jerked awake when the child went still for too long. Her hand flew to her belly. Nothing. No roll, no kick. Cold terror climbed her throat. Sebastian was already leaning in. "Talk to me." "She is quiet." Her words broke. Too quiet. He did not offer false comfort. He set his palm gently over her hand, not her skin, and waited. The moment stretched. Then a faint flutter answered beneath her ribs, light as a fish, turning in deep water. Valentina sagged against the pillows with a broken exhale she could not control. Sebastian's eyes closed briefly, relief cutting through his composure. When he opened them, Amber held steady. Less feral now, more human and somehow more dangerous for it. He reached for her hand again, then stopped short. "Permission?" She looked at him, at the restraint carved into every line of his body, and gave him her wrist. He turned her palm upward and pressed it to the side of his throat where his pulse beat hard and constant beneath warm skin. "Count it," he said. "When fear starts lying, use this rhythm. Mine does not break." The contact sent the bond humming, a low thrum in her chest that was no longer a shockwave but a persistent current. She counted because he told her to, because numbers were safer than hope. 1, 2, 3. Steady. I do not understand this man. I do not understand why he kneels in healer's smoke with blood on his cuffs from my chains, why he watches my face instead of my failures, why he asks like my answer matters. I keep waiting for the price to reveal itself. There is always a price. Safety is a bargain, kindness a loan, mercy a leash. That is what Ironhold taught me, over and over, until even silence felt like debt. But his heartbeat under my hand refuses that lesson. If this is a trap, it is patient beyond reason. If it is not a trap, then everything I built to survive may be the very wall keeping me from the first true shelter I have ever been offered. She realized she was still holding his throat and pulled back abruptly. He released her at once. "Why me?" she asked. "You saw the chain. You heard what they accused. You have every political reason to cage me until this child is born and test blood after." He sat back on the low stool, forearms on his knees, gaze fixed on the brazier for a long moment before he answered. When he spoke, the words seemed dragged from somewhere old and scarred. "My first pack lived in the eastern ravines, smaller than Valewood. Hard winter, thin stores, too many borders to guard. We trusted a peace envoy from a neighboring clan we had fed the previous season." His jaw tightened. "They opened our gates from inside. Fire in the granaries first, then the sleeping dens. By dawn, there were 32 dead, my sister among them." Valentina stared at him, fever forgotten for a heartbeat. "I learned what failure smells like," he continued, voice flat with contained grief. "Char and wet wool and the iron sting of panic in children who cannot find their mothers. I buried them with my own hands. I swore I would never mistake fear for wisdom again." He looked at her then, fully, the weight of his focus almost unbearable. "I will not fail you because others lied louder." Rain intensified, hammering the broken roofline above the tower stair. Valentina swallowed against a sudden ache behind her ribs that had nothing to do with pain. Mara returned with broth and found them in silence, Valentina upright against folded blankets, Sebastian holding the bowl while she forced down spoonful by spoonful. The healer's sharp gaze moved between them and softened by a fraction. "Good," Mara said gruffly. "If she keeps that down, we avoid another night of dry heaving." Valentina managed 3 more spoonfuls before nausea rolled through her again. Sebastian set the bowl aside just in time, caught her hair back from her face, and held the basin with patient efficiency until the wave passed. He rinsed the cloth, cleaned the corners of her mouth, and offered water without comment. By dawn, her fever had broken to a low simmer. Exhaustion replaced panic, heavy and dull. She woke once to find Sebastian asleep in a straight-backed chair near the bedroll, head tipped against stone, one hand still on the armrest nearest her as if, even unconscious, he meant to guard the space around her. 3 days passed before she could stand without swaying. On the 4th, Mara declared she would either walk to the council chamber under her own power or be carried there and embarrassed in front of every ranking wolf in Valewood. Valentina chose walking. The great room had survived the old fire better than the gatehouse. New beams crossed a ceiling blackened with smoke scars. Long tables formed a rough square around a central mapstone carved with valley roots. Wolves filled the benches, their scents layered with wet leather, pine resin, and the brittle tension of a pack rebuilding while watching every border for attack. Sebastian stood at the head of the mapstone in dark leathers, no cloak, forearms bare to the elbow, old scars crossing new muscle. Conversation dipped when Valentina entered with Mara at her side. A few wolves rose out of respect for the healer. Most remained seated, eyes tracking Valentina's belly, her wrists, her face. Sebastian moved to meet her before anyone else could. "Can you stand through this?" "Yes." "Do you want a chair?" "I want to hear what they say when they think I am not breakable." A brief, unexpected curve touched his mouth, gone almost immediately. "Then stay near me." The first reports were practical. Grain stores, collapsed western palisade, missing hunters. Then a broad-shouldered elder with a split ear and winter-white hair slapped his palm on the table. "This is indulgence," he said, glaring at Sebastian. "We have lost 2 supply carts to raiders in 10 days, and you bring an Ironhold exile into command council while rumors spread that her child is a curse line." A woman beside him, iron braids threaded with bone beads, nodded. "Confinement is the only prudent course. Separate quarters, armed watch, No access to route maps until lineage can be verified. The words landed like old stones. Confinement. Verified. Stripped of personhood by polite vocabulary. Sebastian's expression did not change. Name your accusation plainly, Elder Brannock. Elder Ezra. Brannock obliged. She may be carrying Ashford blood meant to claim us from within. If she is your mate, that makes us more vulnerable, not less. A murmur of agreement ran along the left benches. Valentina felt it like sleet against bare skin. A younger guard at the rear stepped forward, emboldened by the elder's tone. With respect, Alpha, if she is a risk, we should at least relocate her now. He reached for Valentina's arm. Sebastian moved faster than sight could map. One instant he was at the table. The next he had the guard bent face down over the mapstone, forearm pinned between shoulder blades, claws extended at the man's throat. Chairs scraped back. Growls erupted around the room. Hands, Sebastian said softly, deadly calm. Do not touch what is under my protection. The guard froze, breath ragged. Alpha, I meant no disloyalty. You presumed authority over my mate. Sebastian increased pressure just enough to make the point unmistakable, then looked to the captain near the door. Strip him of rank. He serves on wall repair until further notice. Unarmed. The captain bowed his head. At once. Sebastian released the guard, who stumbled back, face flushed with humiliation, and was immediately escorted out by 2 sentinels. Silence crashed down in his wake. Then Sebastian took a dagger from his belt, turned his left palm upward, and drew the blade across flesh in one decisive stroke. Blood welled bright and dark in the firelight. Gasps rippled through the chamber. He held his bleeding hand above the mapstone and spoke so every wolf in the room could hear. By Alpha Right and Blood Oath, I declare Valentina Ironhold under my direct protection, and recognized as future Luna of Valewood. Any insult, threat, coercion, or unlawful restraint against her will be treated as treason against me personally and answered under War Code. His blood struck the carved roots in slow, deliberate drops. Witness and be bound. One by one the captains bowed. Mara bowed last, slower, with open approval. Brannock looked furious, Isra calculating, but neither challenged the oath aloud. Sebastian cleaned his palm on a linen strip, as unceremonious as if he had signed an inventory ledger, then turned to Valentina and pulled out the carved chair at his right hand. Not at the back, not against a wall. Beside him. Sit here, he said. She did, because her knees had gone weak for reasons that had nothing to do with fever. The room rearranged itself around that single placement. She could feel it happen, hierarchy shifting like tectonic plates under stone and timber. Reports resumed, stilted at first, then steadier. No one asked for her confinement again. Valentina kept her hands folded over her belly and listened, but part of her attention remained fixed on the man beside her. The blood drying at his wrist, the controlled line of his shoulders, the way he angled his body half toward her, even while debating patrol rotations with his captains. Protection not as performance, but as policy, as law. The knot under her ribs loosened by a fraction she had not thought possible. When Brannock finally addressed her directly, voice grudging but formal, "Lady Valentina, have you insight into Ashford movement near the southern gullies?" she answered without flinching. Sebastian did not speak for her. He did not need to. For the first time since chains closed on her wrists in Ironhold's hall, she felt the edge of a different future take shape. Not safe yet. Not gentle, but real enough to name. She was still afraid. She was still hunted by memory. Yet as voices rose and fell around the council fire, she found herself glancing at Sebastian and no longer searching for the trap. She was searching for what might happen if she believed him. Brannock had just finished asking her, blunt and unsparing, which Ashford corridors Theron would pressure first if Valewood shifted escorts west. Isra stood at his shoulder with one hand braced on the mapstone, skeptical but listening. Valentina drew breath to answer, and a horn sounded from the lower yard, 2 short blasts and 1 long, the signal for border dispatch. Every head turned. Rain had thinned to a cold mist, and the sound carried clearly through the smoke-black rafters. Captain Rurik entered moments later with mud to his knees and a leather satchel clutched in both hands as if it might bite. "Intercepted at the East Ridge," he said, breathing hard. "Courier came from Ironhold's side, traveling without crest. He ran when challenged." Sebastian held out his hand. "Alive?" "Barely. Broke his own vial when cornered. Died foaming." Mara swore under her breath. Brannock muttered that cowards preferred poison to testimony. Valentina stayed very still while Sebastian opened the satchel on the mapstone. Inside lay 3 folded letters sealed in dark wax, a strip of root parchment marked with Valewood supply lanes, and a small iron ring set with black glass. Sebastian broke the first seal. His jaw tightened after 2 lines. He passed the page to Valentina. The handwriting was hers, or close enough to deceive anyone who wanted deception. To Captain Hadrick of the Grey Banner, as agreed, grain convoy leaves by Hollow Bend at moonrise on 3rd night. Escort thin due to wall repairs. Payment upon disruption. Keep survivors enough to tell the tale. Signed, V. Ironhold. A fine tremor began in her fingers, then moved up her arms. "He practiced this," she said, voice low. "Theron copied inventory records when we were children. He used to mock my loops and then imitate them better than I could." She tapped the lower margin. "See the tail on the G. He always drags it downward. I never do." Isra leaned over the table, frowning. "Convenient distinction." "Not convenient, patterned," Valentina replied, and met her gaze without blinking. "Read the 3rd line. Payment upon disruption." "I never wrote trade terms like that. I wrote in measures, not outcomes. He knows how I sound. He cannot think how I think." Sebastian opened the 2nd letter and went still in a different way, the stillness of a blade set flat on skin. "This one is to an Ironhold faction leader. Strike Vale convoy, then cry betrayal and demand emergency command vote when Garrick falters." A murmur spread, ugly and immediate. Brannock's split ear reddened with anger. Mara reached for the ring, sniffed, and recoiled. "Masking resin," she said. "Clove, ash pitch, and night fennel. Whoever wore this wanted their scent blurred." Valentina stared at the black glass and saw Theron's hand turning it in candlelight months ago, while he smiled at her mother and asked whether the healer's store needed more willow bark. A pleasant cousin, a careful helper. A man who had always learned where everyone kept their keys. "He told me at the border my child would never carry Ironhold blood," she said. "Not in name, not in claim. I thought he meant exile. He meant succession." Sebastian looked up sharply. "Say it all." She did, because silence had become the weapon used against her, and she was tired of handing men the blade. "Garrick's health has been failing since first frost. Theron has no direct claim unless the council names a war regent. War panic gives him that vote. If he can cast me as traitor to both sides, then raid your grain, then recover my child from enemy land, he can present himself as the only man able to stabilize 2 packs. Protector, unifier, savior." Her mouth twisted at the word. "He does not need me alive for that story. He needs me discredited." No one argued. Sebastian lifted the final letter, scanned it, and his expression darkened further. "Moon Priest Declaration. It names an unborn line from Ironhold as breaker of Alpha inheritance, and warns any pack sheltering mother or child will lose command blood in 3 generations." Isra inhaled sharply. Brannock made a warding sign against his chest. Mara slammed her palm flat on the table. "Priest seals can be forged." "Can they be forged this well?" Brannock shot back, "when half the valley still kneels to temple decrees?" Valentina watched fear move across faces that had accepted her yesterday by oath and now weighed the cost of continuing. Theron had not merely aimed for her reputation. He had selected every pressure line in the valley and pressed all at once. Hunger, lineage, superstition, old grief. That was why he was dangerous. He did not attack where wolves were strongest. He attacked where they were ashamed. Sebastian folded the prophecy letter once, precise and controlled. Rurik, dispatch 2 riders to the North Basilica and 1 to the Riverside Shrine. Demand verification by scent sign and archive stamp. No hearsay. Mara, test the wax and ink against our records. Brannock, Isra, your team's double escort on all stores until routes are changed. He paused, then added without looking away from Valentina. And no one repeats this declaration as fact inside my walls. By the time the council broke for rations, word had spread anyway. It moved through kitchens and barracks as rumor always did, faster than orders and stickier than truth. A cook crossed herself when Valentina entered for hot broth. 2 apprentices pretended not to stare at her belly and failed. A guard who had bowed that morning now gave a stiff nod and stepped aside as if distance could prevent fate from touching him. Rain gave way to hard wind, and the keep felt carved from noise and tension. Sebastian found her in the upper passage where arrow slits opened to the valley, each gust carrying pine and wet stone. He approached slowly, boots quiet on old flagstone. "You should be resting," he said. "You should be sleeping," she answered. A brief huff of breath escaped him, not quite a laugh. "Neither of us appears obedient." She wrapped her cloak tighter around her shoulders. "Did the shrines answer?" The Riverside Shrine replied. "They have no record of that prophecy line, only fragments from famine years that mention disputed heirs. North Basilica sent notice that their senior archivist is traveling and will respond by dawn. Not certainty, not yet, just a narrowing corridor." Valentina stared through the slit at torch lines on the far ridge. He counted on this. Not proof, just delay. Long enough to make me feel contaminated. Long enough for your wolves to think protecting me is choosing ruin. Sebastian came to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel his heat through wool and leather. "Some are afraid. Some are waiting. For what? For you to blink." He turned, leaning one shoulder against stone so he faced her fully. The wind lifted a pale streak of hair at his temple. "I will not." The bond answered with a warm pull low in her chest, not dramatic, simply insistent, like hands cupping water and refusing to spill. Fear remained braided through it. So did longing she had no vocabulary for yet. "I am standing beside a man who can break bone with one hand, and he keeps asking permission for mine. I am carrying a child in a keep that was enemy ground a week ago, and my body keeps turning toward him as if direction were instinct instead of choice. I want to trust this. I want to fall into it and stop calculating exits, stop measuring every kindness for hidden cost. But wanting is where women like me get buried. Wanting is what Theron hunted in everyone around me and bent into leverage. So breathe. Name what is true right now." His shoulder stays angled to shield me from the wind. His gaze does not slide away from my scars. He has every reason to protect his rank, and still he keeps choosing me in public, where choice has consequences. I am afraid. I am also done pretending fear is wisdom. She exhaled slowly. "If the Basilica confirms forgery, rumor will survive anyway." "Then we fight rumor with law," Sebastian said. "And if law fails, with witnesses." Her throat tightened. "I do not want your pack split because of me. My pack is not split because of you. It is under pressure because an Ashford opportunist thinks terror is governance." She looked at him, really looked, and saw the fatigue beneath his composure, the thin red line where he had reopened his oath cut during training that morning. the determination that did not soften even when tenderness crossed his face. He touched the stone beside her hand, waiting. "May I?" he asked quietly. "Take your hand?" "Yes." His fingers closed around hers, calloused and warm. No rush, no demand. Just contact and breath and wind threading through the passage. For a moment the keep's anxiety dropped away, and she could imagine a life measured by ordinary things. Shared meals, repaired roofs, a crib near a hearth that stayed lit through winter. The horn shattered that moment. 3 rapid blasts. Convoy distress. Sebastian released her hand and was moving even as the second sequence sounded from the lower wall. They reached the courtyard as sentinels rushed to stations. Rurik galloped through the gate on a lathered mare, one side of his face smeared with soot, cloak torn. "Hollow Bend!" he shouted. Grain convoy hit exactly at moonrise. 10 attackers in veil cloaks and iron-holed boots. They fired carts, killed oxen, left one wagon untouched with this nailed to the plank. He threw a scorched board to the ground. Pinned beneath the nail was another letter in Valentina's hand, this one stained with ash. "Take the second wagon and let one survive to carry blame. Speak her name and run east." Signed, V. Ironhold. A growl went through the gathered wolves, low and collective. Someone in the back spat the word traitor. Brannock barked for silence, but silence did not come. It broke into arguments, accusations, fear finding easy shape. Sebastian's voice cut over all of it. "Stand down. Anyone who names guilt without inquiry answers to me." Then another sound rose from outside the inner wall. Not horn, not wolf call. Chanting, rhythmic, fervent. Gate sentries shouted. The postern slammed. Mara pushed through the crowd, face pale with fury. "Traveling moon priest in the outer yard," she said. "Not one of ours. He has 30 villagers with him, and half of them are from the lower farms. He is reading the false decree aloud and demanding the curse-bearer be surrendered for purification." Valentina went cold from scalp to heel. Theron had timed everything to collide. Forged letters, burning grain, public panic, sacred language. Rurik pointed toward the east watchtower. "And there is more. Torches in the gully. Organized line, maybe 40. They are not villagers." Sebastian turned to his captains with lethal clarity. "Brannock, hold the inner gate. Isra, archers to east wall. Rurik, gather every witness from the convoy while memory is fresh. Mara, with me." He looked at Valentina then, and the noise of the courtyard narrowed to the space between them. "I need you in the healer tower," he said, guarded. She shook her head once. "If I hide now, his story wins. If you stand in that yard while a zealot is inciting fear, you become his target." "I already am." The chant outside grew louder. "Purify the line, purify the line." Sebastian's pupils narrowed, predators surfacing at the edge of control. "Valentina." She stepped closer, voice steady though her pulse hammered. "Do not lock me away. Put me where witnesses can see me breathing, speaking, refusing him. You said rumor must be fought with law and witnesses. Use me." For one stretched heartbeat he said nothing. Then he nodded once, sharp. "Council gallery, above the great room. 2 guards you choose, not me." He turned to Mara. "Get her there." A runner crashed into the courtyard, doubled over. "Inner south postern?" he gasped. "Bar is lifting from inside. We found the pin half cut." Inside. Not siege then. Infiltration. Sebastian's head snapped toward the south corridor. Who had watch? Rotating pair from Brannock's third line. Brannock swore, disbelief and rage mixing into one rough sound. The first impact hit the south gate a breath later, wood booming against iron. A second followed, heavier, and sparks jumped from the hinge braces. Wolves surged toward the breach point. Above them, the chant outside rose into a frenzy as if perfectly cued to the assault. Valentina felt the child shift hard beneath her ribs, a startled kick against her palm, and understood with terrible clarity that Theron had not sent one blade at her life. He had sent a script meant to make everyone else hold it for him while the gates opened from within. The south gate boomed again, the iron braces whining as timber split along the grain. Brannock roared for shield lines, and sentinels slammed into formation at the corridor mouth. Over the inner wall, the moon priests' chanting pounded like a drumbeat, each refrain answered by frightened villagers who did not know they were feeding a trap. Purify the line. Purify the line. Sebastian was already moving toward the breach when two wolves in Brannock's third line turned their spears inward and drove their comrades off balance. One ripped the crossbar free from the half-cut pin. The postern lurched open. Attackers poured through in mixed cloaks, veil colors over iron-holed boots, exactly as Rurik had reported. The first wave carried clubs and hooked blades meant for doors and tendons, not honorable combat. They wanted confusion. They got it. Mara grabbed Valentina's sleeve and hauled her toward the gallery stair. Now! They made 3 steps before a masked raider vaulted the railing and landed between them. He swung for Mara's head. Valentina shoved the healer sideways, took the impact on her forearm, and pain flashed to her shoulder. The raider reached for her throat with his free hand. Alive, he hissed through cloth. Ashford wants her alive. Sebastian crossed the yard in a blur of teeth and fury, only half-shifted, claws out, canines lengthened. Amber bled through his irises as something ancient looked out through his gaze. He hit the raider hard enough to crack stone beneath them, tore the weapon from his hand, and flung him into a pillar. 2 more came at Sebastian from behind. Brannock intercepted one, Isra the other, and the courtyard dissolved into overlapping snarls, shouted orders, and the harsh clang of steel on stone. By the time the second gate brace cracked, villagers had begun spilling into the outer yard under the Moon Priest's banner, not armed for war, but dangerous in panic, faces pinched with zeal and hunger. The priest stood on an overturned cart in silver thread robes too clean for the road, voice amplified by a charm tied at his throat. The curse-bearer hides behind a foreign alpha. Surrender her, and the moon may spare your bloodlines. Liar, Mara spat, but her voice vanished in the uproar. Rurik fought to Valentina's side with 3 sentinels and a bloodied cheek. Gallery is compromised. They knew the route. Alpha says to move you to the vault. No. The word rose in her with startling calm. If she vanished into stone while chants swelled above the walls, Theron's story won by silhouette alone. She stepped onto the fountain rim, drew a breath deep enough to burn, and shouted with every ounce of healer command she had used for years over fever wards and birthing cries. Silence. The nearest line faltered, more from shock than obedience. She pointed at the priest's cart. You speak of sacred law, then stand under sacred law. Trial by memory at the ancient stone circle now, before both packs and witnesses. Gasps cut through the yard. Brannock snapped his head toward her. Isra swore softly. Even the chanting stumbled. The priest lifted his chin, calculating. That right is outlawed in war season. It is restricted, not outlawed, Valentina shot back. And only when one party refuses blood. I do not refuse. She held out her arm so the whole yard could see the old iron abrasions and fresh bruise from the raider's grip. You call me curse and traitor in the same breath while men break gates from inside my shelter. If your decree is true, prove it under moon and oathstone. If it is false, your tongue answers old law. A new voice carried from the broken postern, smooth and familiar enough to turn her stomach. You always did love a stage, cousin. Theron Ashford stepped through the breach in a dark traveling coat, rain beating on fur trim, 5 loyalists flanking him in iron-holed leather stripped of insignia. He had abandoned pretense now, no grieving kin, no careful tears. Just hunger sharpened into authority. His gaze slid to Valentina's belly, then back to her face. I came to retrieve what Ironhold lost to enemy manipulation, he announced for all to hear. Stand down, Valewood, and I will take the burden from your walls. Sebastian advanced until he stood between Theron and Valentina, chest heaving, claws still extended. One more step and you leave in pieces. Theron smiled. If you kill me, every undecided pack in the valley calls it mating madness and crowns me martyr. If you hand her over, you keep your trade roads. Trade-offs, Alpha. That was the crux of it, laid bare in public. Political survival bought with her surrender. Again. Valentina climbed down from the fountain and moved to Sebastian's side. No one hands me anywhere. She looked from Theron to the priest to the villagers pressed against the inner wall. Stone circle, trial by memory. If either of you refuses, every witness here records refusal as admission under Old Valley Code. For a stretched beat, Theron seemed ready to force the courtyard anyway. Then he glanced at the villagers, at Brannock's warriors, at the attackers now pinned against shield lines, and made the same calculation he always made. Exploit the law when it served him, wear it when it did not. Fine, he said. Let moonlight judge us. The march to the circle happened under drawn bows and wet torches, no one trusting anyone enough to sheath a blade. The ancient stones rose from the ridge above Valewood like vertebrae of some buried giant, slick with rain and moon silver. Villagers crowded the outer ring. Brannock and Ezra held the northern arc. Theron's loyalists held the south, until Sebastian forced equal spacing by rank command. Mara set the seized letters, ring, and root parchment on the central altar stone, where all could see. 3 days had passed since the courier died with poison on his tongue, and now every unanswered question stood breathing in one place. Valentina stepped into the center unarmed. Her knees trembled once, then steadied. She took Mara's knife, sliced her palm, and pressed blood to the oath stone carved with the valley's oldest sigils. Cold rushed through her arm to her spine. The runes woke in pale silver. I invoke trial by memory, she said, voice carrying farther than it should have. Not to beg innocence, to expose design. Theron cut his own palm with theatrical precision and slapped blood beside hers. And I invoke protection of Pack against internal treachery. The stone accepted both offerings. Light climbed the carved channels and spread across the circle floor in branching lines that linked witness to witness. Scent sharpened in the rain-heavy air. Heartbeats turned audible, then overwhelming, dozens of rhythms braided into one living drum. Valentina closed her eyes and chose not safety, but truth. The first memory struck the stone. Theron in her chamber at dawn, kneeling by her trunk while she slept after a healer shift, planting forged seals beneath spare linens. The image rose in silver haze above the altar, clear enough for Brannock to curse and for villagers to recoil. The second memory followed before the gasps faded. Theron coaching Dain in the smokehouse corridor, pressing 2 coins into his palm and feeding him the line about the bundle at the southern ridge. Dane's face appeared in the projection, frightened and nodding. The third memory came sharp as ice. The council hall. Theron crouched by her chains whispering, "Your child will never carry Ironhold blood." Shock rippled through both pack lines. The moon priest tried to shout over it. Illusion craft. Healer tricks. Mara barked back. Then submit your scent to the stone. Fraud. Theron lunged toward Valentina, hand diving inside his coat for something metallic. Sebastian started forward, but Valentina moved first. She opened her bleeding hand and reached for the silver in her bloodline gift she had hidden even from herself for years, because Ironhold taught daughters to make themselves small enough to survive men like this. Power answered. Chain light erupted from the oath stone in bright silver arcs, snaking across the carved floor and locking around ankles, wrists, spear shafts, and cartwheels. Not crushing, anchoring. Every body in the inner ring froze where it stood, held by humming links of moon-bright restraint. Torches guttered sideways in the sudden wind. Theron snarled and strained against the bands at his boots, unable to take another step. Valentina's voice shook once, then hardened. "No one leaves until the rite completes." She pointed at Mara. "The ring." Mara, bound but close enough, nudged the black glass ring into a channel of light with her boot. The runes flared and cracked open the concealment charm. A stored confession spell spilled into the air in Theron's own voice, flattened but unmistakable. "If convoy burns on third night, blame the exile. If priest stirs curse panic, veil will fracture without open war. Keep the child alive for claim rights. Mother expendable." The villagers went silent as frost. Sebastian's chain snapped first under alpha force. He crossed the circle and seized Theron by the throat, lifting him just clear of the stone. His features shifted further, fangs visible, his aura flaring in a hard gold surge where Valentina's power still threaded the ground. Theron clawed at his wrist, choking. "Say her name again," Sebastian growled, "and I end you here." "Sebastian!" Valentina's command cut through the roar. "Do not!" He held for one more lethal heartbeat, then dropped Theron to his knees without releasing control entirely. Valentina walked the final steps herself. Rain ran down her face, over her split palm, into the silver link still humming at her feet. She looked at Theron and named each betrayal in full hearing: forged letters, bribed witnesses, hired zealotry, convoy sabotage, succession plot through her child. When she finished, she lifted her injured hand to the witness ring. "Under old law, I invoke blood forfeit." Theron Ashford surrenders title, lands, command, and succession right across both territories. Theron spat rainwater and hate at her boots. "You were always expendable." She did not flinch. "You mistook my silence for surrender." Her claws came down through his oath hand, fast and precise, severing the authority mark at the base of his thumb where iron-hold command sigils were burned in youth. He screamed once, more outrage than pain, and the mark went dark. Brannock stepped forward as soon as the chain light loosened. "By witnessed forfeit, claim is void." Isra echoed the ruling. Mara raised the broken ring for all to see. The moon priest dropped to his knees and began babbling that he had been paid in winter grain and temple silver. Villagers backed away from him as if contagion had finally become visible. Sebastian signaled the sentinels. "Iron chains, border exile pits for Ashford and his strike captain. Priest to shrine custody for judgment." Theron was dragged upright, wrists bound, coat torn open, political poise shattered in front of every wolf and farmer he had tried to manipulate. He twisted once toward Valentina, but no one in either pack moved to help him. As they hauled him down the ridge, the storm began to break. Rain thinned. Moonlight spread across the stones, washing blood, soot, and lies into the same pale sheen. Valentina swayed as the last of the chain light faded from her hands. Sebastian caught her elbow, steady and warm, and this time she let herself lean for one breath before standing on her own again. She stood with rain on her skin and Theron's scream still echoing down the ridge, and for the first time the valley's silence did not feel like accusation. It felt like space opening. An hour after Theron was taken toward the border pits, Mara led Valentina into the moon temple above the circle, a roof-broken sanctuary of cracked columns and old silver inlay where storm water drummed through gaps in stone. Sebastian followed, dismissed the sentinels at the threshold, and barred the door with his own hand. No one argued. Mara cleaned Valentina's palm, wrapped it in fresh linen, then pressed a listening shell against her belly and smiled with exhausted approval. "Strong rhythm," she said, steadier than before the rite. She turned to Sebastian. "Do not keep her standing long." At the door, she paused and lifted a satchel. "For record. Letters, route parchment, false decree, and the confession ring are sealed for joint archive review at first light. Brannock and Isra witnessed, Rurik has already sent copies to both shrines. Her gaze softened as it settled on Valentina. No one can bury this now. When they were alone, rain and breath filled the temple. Sebastian stepped closer, then stopped with deliberate restraint, giving her room to choose. Moonlight slid over the cut at his palm, the old scars along his forearms, the new fury banked behind his eyes. "I need to ask before anything else," he said. "Are you hurt anywhere I have not seen? Bruised, tired, alive?" Her voice shook once, and done being handled like territory. His jaw tightened. "Then hear me clearly. No claim without your word. No touch without your word." She nodded, but he did not move. "Valentina, do you want this bond completed?" She looked at him, at the man who had bled in council, crossed a battlefield to pull raiders off her body, and stopped at every boundary like it was sacred law. Fear still lived in her bones. So did trust, growing in the same place. "Yes." He took one more step. "May I touch you?" "Yes." His fingertips found her cheek, warm and calloused, then slid to the side of her neck where pulse jumped under skin. The bond answered with a deep, resonant pull that ran through her chest and settled low in her spine. He exhaled, forehead touching hers. "One more time," he whispered, rough with control. "May I mark you, mate?" The word undid something guarded in her. "Yes, Sebastian, mark me." He bared his throat first, tilting his head back in an offering that made her breath catch. Trust before claim. Then he lowered his mouth to the juncture of her neck and shoulder and paused. Lips against skin, waiting for the smallest recoil. She gave none. His teeth pierced, sharp and precise. Pain flashed bright, immediate, then transformed as heat flooded outward from the bite in widening rings. Not burning, binding. Her knees weakened, his arm locked around her waist before she could sway. The ache that had haunted the bond since the gatehouse dissolved into a rushing warmth that reached her wrists, her ribs, her womb. Beneath her palm, the child kicked once, then settled into a calm, even rhythm. Sebastian lifted his head slowly, breath ragged, eyes molten with reverence and hunger held in check. Blood and rain mingled at her skin. He sealed the mark with his tongue and a trembling exhale. "Mine," he said, not as ownership, as vow. Never bartered, never surrendered. She cupped his face with both hands and pulled him down until her mouth brushed his pulse. "Yours," she whispered back, "because I choose it." She bit over the strong beat in his throat. He shuddered, a rough sound breaking from him as her teeth set and released. Gold runes flared to life along his arms, racing from wrist to shoulder in branching lines that lit the dim temple like dawn caught in stone. The bond surged fully open between them, memory and instinct and promise flowing both ways at once. Her nights of cold endurance, his years of searching, the shared terror at the gate, the refusal to abandon, the fierce quiet certainty that neither would stand alone again. "Mate?" The bond pulsed, clear as spoken language. She felt his grief for the ravine dead, old and sharp but no longer solitary. He felt the long humiliation she had carried, the way silence had been forced into her like a bridle. The exchange was not gentle, but it was honest, and honesty steadied into peace. When the surge eased, they remained wrapped around each other, foreheads touching, breaths finding the same cadence. Rain struck broken stone overhead. Inside their joined hold, the world finally stopped tilting. "No more barter, no more exile," he said against her hair. She closed her eyes and answered the words that had waited in her since the border marker. "Only chosen, only ours." By dawn, the storm had passed, and the valley gathered in the great courtyard under washed, clean sky. The North Basilica archivist arrived mud-splashed and furious, carrying ledger tablets and scent-sealed wax. Before both packs, She confirmed the prophecy decree was forged from stolen temple phrasing, the seal cast from a counterfeit die, the ink mixed with marsh gall never used by priesthood scriptoria. The Riverside Shrine's report matched it, line for line. The hired moon priest was stripped of office and taken in chain custody to stand judgment under his own order. Rurik presented the satchel evidence on a stone table. Forged letters, scorched board, root parchment, broken confession ring. Mara testified to masking resin. Ezra identified the half-cut postern pin and named the two infiltrators from Brannock's third line. Both were sentenced to labor under guard at the eastern quarry. Dain, brought from Ironhold under witness summons, confessed to taking Theron's silver in the smokehouse and publicly recanted his counsel lie. No one looked away when he spoke. Near midday, Elder Garrick arrived with a reduced Ironhold delegation, leaning hard on his staff. Elder Mira stood beside him, stripped of voting braid pending censure. Garrick's voice shook but carried. Valentina Ironhold was condemned on false testimony and forged proof. The charge is null before moon law and pack law. He bowed his head toward her, old pride cracking around regret. We ask treaty, not absolution. Valentina held his gaze, then nodded once. Treaty with terms. Those terms were carved and spoken before sunset. Merged patrols at Hollow Bend and South Pass, shared grain reserves audited by both packs, cross-pack witness requirement for treason claims, sanctuary protections she authored for abandoned wolves and children, so no one could be traded as indemnity again. War votes and treaty breaks would require dual assent, Alpha and Luna together. When Brannock placed the silver circlet of High Luna on her head, his rough voice was formal and steady. By witnessed bond and lawful accord, Valentina Ironhold Valewood holds authority over sanctuary, law, and succession protections in the United Valley. Ezra knelt first, fist to heart, then Rurik, Mara, and the captains. Even Garrick bowed, slower, with both hands on his staff. At the edge of the crowd, her mother wept openly, no performance left in her face. Her younger brother stepped forward, set Valentina's old healer satchel at her feet, and whispered, I should have spoken. She touched his shoulder, neither forgiving cheaply nor turning away. At first light the next morning, Sebastian and Valentina stood in the rebuilt keep's inner garden where fresh timber still smelled of pine sap. No crowd now, only close witnesses. He took her hand, their marks visible, their bond quiet and strong. Beyond the wall, carpenters argued good-naturedly over window frames for the nursery chamber Mara had already claimed would need better winter insulation than any Alpha quarters had ever received. Sebastian brushed his thumb over her mark and smiled, fierce and soft at once. Home. Valentina looked at the rising sun on stone that had once been enemy ground, then at the man beside her. Then at the life moving steadily beneath her heart. Home, she agreed,